Your body has a language that no blood test, scan, or wearable can fully translate. Long before measurable changes appear, your cells communicate through subtle shifts in behavior, almost like whispers instead of alarms. Autophagy does not announce itself loudly. It begins quietly, at a level most people never think to observe. In laboratory studies, scientists noticed that cellular recycling does not start when the body is in crisis, but when it anticipates one. Cells respond to internal signals of scarcity and stress before damage accumulates. This early response is not about panic, but preparation, a survival strategy refined over millions of years. What makes this fascinating is that the first sign is not hunger, fatigue, or fat loss. Those come later. The earliest signal happens inside the cell, altering how energy is sensed and allocated. It is a metabolic shift, not a physical sensation, which is why it goes unnoticed by most people. Understanding this silent signal changes how we think about health. It suggests that cellular renewal begins long before we feel different, and that waiting for obvious symptoms means arriving late to the process. The real question is not if autophagy starts, but when the body decides it is necessary. Many people believe autophagy switches on after a specific number of hours without food. This idea is appealing because it is simple, but biology is rarely that rigid. Research shows that cells do not follow clocks, they follow conditions. Autophagy is regulated by nutrient-sensing pathways that respond to insulin levels, amino acid availability, and cellular energy status. These signals fluctuate constantly, even within the same day. Two people can fast for the same amount of time and trigger very different cellular responses. What really matters is not the absence of food alone, but the internal message that nutrients are scarce enough to justify recycling old cellular components. Until that threshold is reached, cells prefer maintenance over renewal. This explains why autophagy often begins later than expected, and sometimes earlier than planned. It is a decision made at the cellular level, based on efficiency and survival, not on human schedules or fasting rules. One of the most common misconceptions is confusing discomfort with cellular renewal. Feeling hungry, lightheaded, or low on energy does not mean autophagy has started. These sensations are driven by hormones and nervous system responses, not by intracellular recycling. Studies show that early fasting discomfort is often related to falling glucose levels and changes in ghrelin, the hunger hormone. Autophagy, however, requires deeper metabolic adaptation, especially reduced insulin signaling and altered mitochondrial activity. Another mistake is assuming fat burning equals autophagy. While they can occur together, they are not the same process. Fat oxidation can increase without significant autophagic activity, especially if protein and amino acids remain available. This misunderstanding leads many people to think they are activating powerful cellular cleanup, when in reality, the cells are still operating in conservation mode. The body has not yet received the signal that renewal is worth the energy cost.
Every cell contains a highly organized recycling system designed to break down damaged proteins and worn-out structures. Autophagy is not a random cleanup. It is a targeted and energy-efficient process controlled by precise molecular machinery. When conditions are stable, cells prioritize function over renewal. They repair what they can and tolerate minor damage. Autophagy becomes relevant only when maintenance is no longer efficient enough to guarantee survival. At this stage, specialized structures form inside the cell to isolate defective components. These structures eventually merge with lysosomes, where the breakdown and recycling process occurs. This is not destruction, it is transformation. What makes this process remarkable is that it is selective. Cells do not clean everything at once. They start with the most problematic components, preserving what still works. This selectivity is key to understanding the first true sign that autophagy is beginning. Before autophagy can be observed in measurable ways, the cell undergoes a crucial internal shift. This change does not involve breaking anything down yet. Instead, it alters how the cell evaluates what is worth keeping and what is expendable. Researchers describe this moment as a transition from growth mode to conservation mode. Signaling pathways related to abundance begin to quiet down, while stress adaptation pathways slowly gain influence. This shift is subtle, but it marks a turning point in cellular decision-making. At this stage, energy is no longer used to build new structures. The cell becomes more selective, delaying non-essential tasks. This reallocation of resources is the earliest functional sign that autophagy is approaching. If this is changing how you think about fasting and cellular health, leave a comment with the word cell so I know you are following the logic so far. Cells are constantly balancing two opposing strategies, growth and survival. Growth requires abundance, while survival favors efficiency. Autophagy sits at the intersection of these two states. When nutrient sensing pathways detect prolonged scarcity, the body does not immediately activate autophagy. It first tests whether adaptation alone is enough. Only when adaptation fails does the renewal process become necessary. This is the moment when survival shifts from short-term coping to long-term optimization. Instead of preserving everything, the cell starts investing in quality over quantity. Damaged components become liabilities rather than tolerable flaws. This decision is irreversible in the short term. Once initiated, the cell commits energy to recycling because the payoff is improved function and resilience, not immediate comfort. Under advanced microscopy, scientists observed that the earliest stages of autophagy involve changes in membrane dynamics. Small isolation membranes begin to form long before large-scale breakdown occurs. These membranes selectively wrap around defective proteins and dysfunctional mitochondria. This selectivity is critical because removing the wrong components would compromise the cell's survival. Interestingly, these early structures appear before measurable increases in fat oxidation or ketone production. This confirms that autophagy initiation is not dependent on visible metabolic markers. What scientists found most surprising is how coordinated this process is. Multiple signaling pathways converge to ensure that autophagy starts only when the benefits clearly outweigh the costs.
Energy status is the final checkpoint before autophagy begins. Cells monitor ATP availability, mitochondrial efficiency, and oxidative stress in real time. When energy production becomes less efficient, cells interpret this not as failure, but as information. It signals that maintaining damaged structures is more costly than recycling them. This is why the first sign of autophagy is not weight loss or ketosis, but improved energy efficiency at the cellular level. The cell aims to do more with less. Once this energetic threshold is crossed, autophagy is no longer optional. It becomes the most rational strategy for preserving long-term cellular function. Before autophagy can be measured or visually identified in laboratory settings, cells undergo a fundamental internal reprogramming. This change is not destructive and does not involve breaking down cellular components yet. Instead, it alters how the cell prioritizes its resources, shifting focus away from expansion and toward preservation. In this phase, signaling pathways associated with growth and abundance, especially those stimulated by constant nutrient availability, begin to lose dominance. At the same time, pathways linked to stress adaptation and efficiency slowly rise in influence. This transition is gradual, which is why it often goes unnoticed even in controlled studies. What makes this moment significant is that the cell stops behaving as if resources will always be available.
Protein synthesis slows, unnecessary cellular activities are postponed, and energy usage becomes more deliberate. This is the earliest functional signal that the environment has changed. Although autophagy has not started yet, the cell is preparing for it. This preparatory state is the first true indication that recycling may soon become necessary, even before any physical or metabolic signs appear. Every cell constantly evaluates whether it should invest energy in growth or redirect it toward survival. Under normal conditions, growth is favored because it supports repair, reproduction, and adaptation. However, when nutrient signals remain low for long enough, this balance begins to shift. Initially, the body attempts to adapt without triggering autophagy. It improves metabolic efficiency, reduces energy waste, and relies on short-term coping mechanisms. This stage is essentially a test to determine whether deeper intervention is required. When these adjustments are no longer sufficient, cells face a critical decision. Continuing to preserve damaged or inefficient structures becomes more costly than replacing them. At this point, renewal offers a better chance of long-term survival than simple endurance. This is when autophagy becomes a strategic choice rather than an emergency response. The body commits to internal renewal not because it is failing, but because it is optimizing itself for prolonged stress. Using advanced imaging techniques, researchers observed that the earliest signs of autophagy are structural, not metabolic. Small membrane formations begin to appear inside the cell, signaling the initiation of the recycling machinery. These membranes do not form randomly. They selectively target damaged proteins, malfunctioning organelles, and inefficient mitochondria. This selectivity ensures that functional components are preserved while liabilities are removed. One of the most important findings is that these early autophagic structures appear before major shifts in fat metabolism or ketone production. This challenges the popular belief that visible metabolic changes mark the beginning of autophagy.
What scientists consistently observed is coordination. Multiple molecular pathways activate simultaneously to regulate timing, scope, and selectivity, ensuring that autophagy begins only when it is truly beneficial. Cellular energy status acts as the final gatekeeper for autophagy initiation. Cells constantly monitor how efficiently they produce and use energy, especially through mitochondrial performance and ATP availability. When energy production becomes less efficient due to accumulated damage or prolonged nutrient scarcity, cells interpret this as a signal. Maintaining inefficient structures requires more energy than replacing them, tipping the balance toward recycling. This explains why the first sign of autophagy is not external or visible. It is an internal improvement in energy logic, where the cell chooses optimization over preservation of flawed components. Once this energetic threshold is crossed, autophagy becomes the most efficient strategy available. From this point forward, the process is no longer theoretical, it is actively shaping cellular health. The activation of autophagy is often mistakenly associated with visible fat loss, but these processes operate on very different biological priorities. From an evolutionary perspective, the body treats internal efficiency as a more urgent task than altering external energy reserves. Before mobilizing fat tissue, cells attempt to reduce internal waste and improve performance using existing resources. Autophagy allows cells to recycle dysfunctional proteins and organelles, which immediately lowers energy demand. This is a far more efficient response than increasing fat oxidation, which requires systemic hormonal changes and metabolic reprogramming across multiple tissues. Experimental data consistently show that autophagic markers can rise in the absence of significant changes in fat metabolism. This demonstrates that cellular renewal is initiated independently of visible weight or body composition changes.
Only after this energetic threshold is crossed does the body expand its response to include increased reliance on fat as a fuel source. Fat burning is therefore a secondary adaptation, not the initiating signal of autophagy. One of the least discussed effects of early autophagy is a subtle shift in how the body handles physiological stress. This change does not produce dramatic sensations, which is precisely why it often escapes attention. At the cellular level, improved quality control reduces the accumulation of damaged components that interfere with normal function. As a result, cells become more stable and less reactive to fluctuations in energy supply and oxidative stress. In practical terms, this can manifest as steadier mental and physical energy rather than peaks and crashes. The body becomes better at maintaining function under less than ideal conditions. Although this effect is quiet and gradual, it is meaningful. It reflects a system that is prioritizing resilience and efficiency over short-term performance gains. Autophagy plays a central role in preventing the gradual buildup of cellular damage associated with aging. Proteins that are misfolded or organelles that no longer function efficiently are major contributors to cellular decline when left unchecked. By removing these dysfunctional components, autophagy reduces chronic inflammation and supports healthier metabolic signaling. This creates an internal environment that is less prone to degenerative processes. Research in longevity consistently links enhanced autophagic activity with extended cellular health span. The benefit is not that cells live forever, but that they function better for longer. This is why autophagy is considered a foundational mechanism in disease prevention. It targets underlying cellular dysfunction rather than attempting to correct downstream symptoms. If you want to understand what happens after autophagy starts protecting your cells, there is a video on this channel called What Happens to Your Immune System When Autophagy Finally Starts? Science Explained. It explains how immune cells respond once cellular cleanup is active and why this process improves the body's ability to deal with infections and chronic inflammation. Watching that next helps connect cellular renewal with real immune protection. After the first signal of autophagy is triggered, the body begins operating under a different internal logic. Cellular systems shift towards selectivity, favoring the preservation of high-quality components and the removal of inefficient ones. Over time, this internal cleanup improves communication between cells and enhances mitochondrial efficiency. Energy production becomes more reliable, even under conditions of limited nutrient availability. At the systemic level, this translates into improved metabolic flexibility and greater tolerance to physiological stress. These changes do not happen overnight, but they accumulate steadily. If this explanation changed how you understand autophagy, like the video, subscribe for evidence-based health content, and share it with someone who still believes autophagy starts with hunger. And if you want to support the channel and help more science-based videos like this reach new people, leaving a super thanks is a simple way to make a real impact.